The sky above Cadet Academy, 42 amperes, was too clean to trust. A sterile blue dome, scrubbed of clouds and blemish, it stretched over the training grounds with the kind of artificial calm that made Cade Holt itch. Not from any allergic reaction, though the air did smell vaguely like antiseptic, but from experience. Too many days spent in weather, too quiet, had taught him to expect something loud. Something loud came. "Hey, Earth spawn," said a voice with a distinct metallic lilt of a Zarelian throat. "Do you float, or do your kind just sink and hope for the best?" Cade turned. 4 cadets blocked the narrow path between the mess hall and the dormitories. A glint of water shimmered in the distance beyond them, the Academy reservoir, cordoned off for emergency use only. The regulation signs were there more for show, the staff barely enforced them. Not when the instructors were cycling through another round of zero-G acclimation drills a continent away. "Some of us float, some of us swim," Cade said evenly, his tray still warm in his hands. The food, a Nutriblock and 2 scoops of beige protein paste, was forgettable. The tension wasn't. "Oh, fascinating," sneered Zevran, the group's unofficial leader and proud owner of the longest cranial fronds in the graduating class. "And tell us, Deathworlder, what happens when you don't touch the bottom?" Cade's eyes narrowed slightly. He'd learned to clock the looks by now. The too casual stance, the sidelong glances, the eagerness barely concealed behind facial ridges. This wasn't another round of xenobiological trivia. This was setup. "Why?" he asked. "You planning a swim test?" "Just a bit of bonding," said Zevran. "Come on, Holt, show us how Deathworlders relax." They didn't let him drop his tray. Clawed hands snatched it mid-step, and another pair grabbed him by the arms. He could have fought his survival training, practically screamed at him to do it, but the last thing he needed was a disciplinary flag. He'd only just gotten through his last evaluation without being reassigned back to Earth. The reservoir looked calm, too calm. A wide, circular basin, surrounded by synthetic stone. It reflected the sky like a mirror. It didn't hint at depth, didn't whisper it's cold. Cade barely had time to suck in a breath before they shoved him in. The water hit like a wall. Down. He was going down. It didn't matter that he'd spent summers back home, cliff jumping into quarry pools or swimming laps in high school. It didn't matter that the survival tanks at Earth's Academy were colder, darker, and more merciless than this engineered puddle. What mattered now was the shock. The water surged into his nose, into his open mouth from the yell he hadn't meant to make. A spike of panic lit up in his chest, sharp and ugly. He flailed, once. His lungs seized. Something bubbled out of him, a cough, a grunt, maybe both, and then instinct finally clawed its way to the surface. Kick. Turn. Tilt the head back. Breathe, no, not yet, not here. Up. He had to get up. He pushed with both legs, arms pulling in long strokes, his eyes half shut and burning from the chemicals. His body remembered before his mind did, slipping into the rhythm learned years ago at a dusty lakeside in Indiana. By the time his head broke the surface, he was gagging, coughing violently. The water sprayed out of him in fits. His throat burned, his ribs ached, but he was breathing. The cadets froze on the edge, every single one. He wasn't drowning. He was swimming. They didn't move, not one. Cade spat out the last of the water and paddled toward the edge. His strokes were a little crooked, he hadn't had time to pace his breathing, but he moved with enough control to grip the side and hoist himself halfway up. His limbs trembled, chest tight and sore. He blinked water from his eyes and rasped, "What the hell is wrong with you?" Zevran stared at him like he'd grown extra limbs. You were under for 16.2 seconds. "Yeah, and now I'm not." "You didn't die." "Not for lack of trying." Cade hauled himself the rest of the way out. Water poured from his uniform in cold sheets. His fingers were pale and pruned at the edges. His breath still came short. "Congratulations, you found out humans can get wet." "No, one of the others began, but Zevran silenced him with a look. "Is that how?" Zevran asked instead, voice softer now. "You didn't panic. You didn't flail. You moved like you knew what you were doing." Cade gave a dry cough and doubled over briefly, coughing again, louder. A spray of leftover water hit the stone. "I did panic," he said after a beat, chest heaving. "You don't get shoved underwater and shrug it off." I swallowed water. "My lungs feel like I smoked a bonfire." But yeah, I knew what to do. You learned that? Zevran asked, stepping closer now, fascinated. Learned it? I mean, yeah, but also, it's instinct. We float in amniotic fluid before we're even born. Some babies swim before they can walk. You don't learn to fear water unless something teaches you to. All four cadets recoiled like he'd just described childbirth with teeth. You exist in fluid? In the womb, yeah. That is, Zevran's voice cracked, unnatural. Not for us. Cade sat down heavily on the ground, his wet clothes pressing cold against his skin. The fatigue was setting in fast now. His throat scratched every time he inhaled, and he could feel the pressure in his upper chest, dull but insistent. He didn't want to admit it, but he needed a medic. 2 hours later, Cade sat on the medbay cot in a fresh Academy-issue tunic, an oxygen monitor clipped to his finger, and a subtle ache between his shoulder blades. Your O2 sat's fine, the attending medic, a soft-spined Bellari named Menta, reported. But you've got mild aspiration in the lower lobes, nothing critical. Just rest, drink water the drinking kind, and no strenuous exercise until tomorrow. I feel winded just sitting up, Cade muttered. Exactly. That's your lungs reminding you they're not fish gills. Count yourself lucky. One more mouthful, and we'd be looking at pulmonary lavage and antibiotics. Fantastic. You'll be sore. Breathing might feel shallow for a day or two. If it gets worse, report immediately. Cade nodded once and winced. By the time he returned to the dorms, the whispers had already started. Whispers not of humiliation or triumph, but confusion. Muted awe. Words like fluid native and waterborne chased him down the hall. Later that evening, a message pinged on his terminal. Just one line. Will you show us how? Cade stared at it for a long time before replying. Show you how to do what? The reply came instantly. Not die. In the water. By the next morning, the message thread had ballooned into a full-blown discussion board. At least 30 cadets, some from Cade's own squad, others from neighboring cohorts, had commented. Most messages hovered in that awkward zone between curiosity and caution. Do you have to breathe fast or slow when in water? Can you see down there? Is it true your people teach this to children? Does it feel like floating or falling? One comment stood out. I once stepped into a canal as a child. My parents pulled me out within seconds. I screamed until my vocal sacs ruptured. I was dry, but I didn't sleep for 2 cycles. You went under and came out moving. I need to know how. Cade didn't reply right away. His ribs still ached from coughing, and he'd slept only in fits, waking each time he rolled onto his sore side. The medbay had cleared him to resume physical activity, but only with limitations. No extended exertion, no breath-holding drills, and avoid cold exposure. That last bit was a joke. The reservoir was always cold. He walked into morning drills to find Zevran waiting by the mess hall. I'm not apologizing, Zevran said before Cade could speak. Didn't ask you to. But I misjudged. I thought the water would terrify you, that you'd flounder, maybe scream, not fight back. Cade raised an eyebrow. Getting forcibly dunked doesn't usually bring out people's best. Zevran ignored the jab. The others want to learn, not just the ones from my cluster. I heard some of the Krelians and 2 Sorth tried holding their breath in hydro showers last night. One passed out, broke his tusk on the tile. Cade sighed. And you want me to what? Give lessons? I'm a cadet, not a lifeguard. You're the only one who's survived immersion. That makes you the most qualified sentient on campus. Cade looked past Zevran, out toward the tree line, where the reservoir shimmered in the early light. It was still marked as off-limits, but enforcement was loose when classes paused for intermodule rotations. He rubbed the back of his neck. If I do this, he said, we do it safely. No surprises. No pushing, no dunking, and definitely no diving, until I say otherwise. Zevran nodded once, sharp and solemn. Understood. Word spread fast. By mid-afternoon, Cade stood at the edge of the reservoir with 15 cadets behind him, half of whom looked like they wanted to bolt. The others, like Zevran, wore expressions torn between grim resolve and mortal dread. He clapped his hands once. First rule, no one goes in alone. We're doing this in pairs. You'll stay at the shallow end, and you'll follow my instructions exactly. One of the Krillians, a broad-shouldered, pale-eyed alien named Rith, raised a hand. What if we can't float? Most of you won't. That's okay. Floating isn't about weight, it's about balance and calm. Panic sinks you faster than gravity. He demonstrated first. Wading into the water, Cade suppressed a shiver as it bit at his skin. He kept it chest deep and faced the watching cadets. Watch my body. No kicking yet, just lying back. Head relaxed, arms out, lungs full. He eased into the float, letting the water cradle him. His back tensed for a second before he let it go, staring up at the sky. After a few seconds, he stood upright again. Your lungs are your buoyancy. Think of them like a flotation bladder. If you panic, you lose rhythm. Stay loose. The cadets exchanged worried looks. Finally, Zevran stepped forward. I'll go. He entered the reservoir with stiff, mechanical steps, like he expected the water to burn him. Cade met him halfway. Lean back, Cade said quietly. I'm right here. I won't let you go under. Zevran hesitated. His fronds flattened involuntarily. But then he closed his eyes and leaned back, his narrow chest rising with a deep breath. For 2 seconds he stayed up. On the third, his torso twisted and his legs flailed. He sank like a stone. Cade grabbed him immediately and pulled him upright. Zevran came up sputtering, but not choking. It grabbed me. It didn't grab you. You moved. The moment your muscles tensed, your center of balance shifted. You pushed yourself down. Zevran coughed, but nodded. I can't believe this is a real skill, muttered Rith from the edge. It's not just a skill, Cade said. It's survival. My people have to know how to cross rivers, escape floods, survive shipwrecks. We don't have gills, but we make it work. The rest of the afternoon passed in splashes, coughs, and the occasional curse in languages Cade didn't recognize. He split his attention across multiple groups, pairing cadets who looked most likely to panic with those who had calmer dispositions. It didn't always work. One Sorth cadet panicked so hard he latched onto Cade mid-sink, dragging them both under for a terrifying moment before Cade kicked free and pulled him up. They sat on the edge together afterward, dripping and silent. Cade's chest ached again, but he didn't say anything. I thought it would feel like being weightless, the Sorth said. It does, Cade said, catching his breath. But not the kind of weightless you control. Water lets you float, but it doesn't want you there. It tests you. It asks if you belong. The Sorth stared at him. That's bleak. That's Earth. By sunset, only a handful of cadets had managed more than 10 seconds of floating. No one attempted strokes. Even Cade stayed clear of full swimming. His lungs still protested every deep breath. He knew the warning signs. Pushing too hard, too fast, could lead to secondary infection, or worse, silent hypoxia. He ended the lesson before nightfall. I want you all to hydrate, eat something with salt, and sleep, he told them. You're not just fighting your bodies, you're fighting years of cultural wiring that says this, he gestured to the water, is death. That doesn't go away overnight. As they filtered out, some limping, some shivering, one lingered behind. It was a first-year cadet, barely old enough for academy standards, pale green skin, wide eyes, no fronds or facial ridges yet. You really learned that as a child? The cadet asked. Yeah, we have little floats, shallow pools. Parents hold you up until you can hold yourself. Some toddlers dive before they speak. The cadet shuddered. And you liked it? I didn't at first. I was scared too. But the first time I stayed afloat on my own, it felt like flying. The cadet didn't respond, but walked away slowly, glancing once more at the water. That night, Cade sat at his terminal and updated his medical chart. His vitals were stable, but the ache in his chest persisted. He logged a note for the infirmary, just in case. Better they catch a fluid buildup early than wait until he started wheezing. He hesitated before closing the terminal. New messages had already come in. Can I bring my partner next time? I practiced breathing like you said. I lasted 4 seconds. I dreamed I floated. Is that normal? Cade didn't smile, not exactly, but his shoulders dropped a little. He answered each message with simple encouragement and closed the terminal for good. Tomorrow, they would try again. And maybe, just maybe, someone would float. By the end of the 3rd day, no one was laughing. The reservoir had transformed. Once just a utilitarian water source bordered by warning signs and administrative neglect, it now thrummed with life. Cadets circled its edge in makeshift groups, their voices subdued and uncertain, like students watching a wild animal nap, curious, but always ready to bolt. Cade stood knee-deep in the water again, arms folded across his chest, a towel draped over one shoulder. He was recovering, but still moving slower than usual. His voice rasped slightly from the lingering soreness in his throat, and he hadn't dared stay submerged for more than a few seconds at a time. Still, the medic's clearance stood. He was healing. Realistically. "All right," he called. "Let's pick up where we left off." This time, there were over 40 cadets present. Word had spread through more than one species cohort. Even a few instructors off duty, unarmed, stood along the distant tree line, observing but not interfering. The first practical skill today was kicking. Last time, we focused on balance, staying on the surface. Today, we add motion. Propulsion, Cade said, which means your legs are going to betray you. Zevran raised a hand, not mocking this time. Clarify? They'll panic. Your knees will bend too much, or your ankles will freeze. It's normal. You're used to walking. Swimming needs something else, rhythm and patience. He waded deeper and demonstrated again, forcing himself to ignore the pinch in his ribs. Arms stretched out, light flutter kicks behind, small movements, deliberate, controlled. The reservoir echoed with splashes within minutes. Most cadets thrashed. One immediately sank. Another tried flapping all 4 limbs at once and spun in place until he disoriented himself. Rith, the pale-eyed Krellian, shouted that the water had no obvious direction, and how was he supposed to aim? "You don't aim," Cade called. "You feel your direction." That is not a helpful instruction. Neither is panicking. Try again. One of the Sorth cadets managed 4 full seconds of forward motion before he inhaled a mouthful of water, sputtered, and bolted for the edge. Cade followed and helped pull him out. The cadet sat on the bank, dripping, heaving breaths through his tusked jaw. "I thought I had it," he muttered. "You almost did," Cade said. "You started well, but your chest tensed. That lifted your legs and tilted your head under. You can't muscle through this. You have to let the water help." "The water isn't helping, it's actively trying to kill me." Cade exhaled through his nose, grabbed a training float from the pile he'd borrowed from the indoor recreation wing, and pushed it into the cadet's hands. "Then stop fighting the water. Start fighting your instinct to fight the water." The cadet blinked at that. That's paradoxical. So is staying alive. Cade had expected most cadets to give up after 2 sessions, maybe 3. He hadn't expected to arrive on the 4th day to find pairs of aliens practicing breath control in the reservoir at dawn. He watched from the ridge for a few minutes, half concealed in the morning mist. No one had seen him yet. Zevran was leading warm-ups now, calling instructions in slow, deliberate cadences. Inhale, hold, release. Again, control your fear. Keep your spine loose. Eyes open. Let the water reflect your stillness. It was far from perfect. More than one cadet immediately sucked in water, but no one fled. Cade descended the hill quietly and joined them. "You're early," Zevran said, noticing him. "You're leading. You said not to go in alone." Cade squinted at him. "You memorized that rule." "I wrote it down," Zevran said, holding up a laminated card. "You said survival starts with discipline. I thought it might help." Cade stared at him. "You laminated it. Hydrophobic material coating. Found the formula in the chemistry lab." Cade turned away quickly, hiding his laugh in a cough. His lungs were still sore, but he was improving. The ache had lessened, and his breath didn't hitch anymore when he spoke at length. He wasn't ready for long-distance swimming, but he could instruct again without needing to sit down after every session. By midday, the most determined cadets were attempting full-body coordination drills, kicking, arm movements, simple strokes. A handful managed to propel themselves in controlled bursts from one marker to the next. Not fast, not graceful, but undeniably intentional. One even smiled. It wasn't much, but Cade recognized the look. That sudden shock of, "I did it," followed by disbelief, followed by joy. He remembered that moment in himself. That evening, he received a visit from one of the base instructors. Instructor Alrin was a Ritari, a species that resembled a walking sheet of silk armor, and spoke in a constant whispering tone. He stood motionless outside Cade's dorm and waited to be acknowledged. Cade sat up from his bunk. Sir? I observed your sessions today, Alrin said. You have unintentionally initiated a cross-species enrichment unit. I didn't, Cade stopped. This wasn't a plan. I was just surviving, I understand. But survival has spread, as it often does, among humans. Alrin held out a data slate. The Academy Council wants to formalize it. Create a program, optional but encouraged. Taught by you. I'm not qualified, Cade said automatically. You are the only reason 6 cadets didn't suffer organ collapse from accidental immersion drills this week. That qualifies you, at least here. Cade took the slate slowly. You understand they fear the water, Alrin continued. To them, it is unnatural, bordering on sacred, or cursed. They are not like you. I know. And yet they follow you into it, every day. Cade looked up. Doesn't that say more about them than me? Alrin tilted his head. Perhaps. But someone has to go first. By the end of the week, the reservoir had a new nickname. The Breathing Grounds. It was unofficial, of course, but cadets had started calling it that after Rith, in a moment of exhausted exasperation, yelled, "This place is where breath dies or begins." No one knew if he meant it as poetry or threat. Either way, the name stuck. Floating was no longer a novelty. Kicking had turned into games, races from one marker buoy to the next. Arm coordination remained a disaster, but 2 cadets had figured out a clumsy version of a backstroke that worked well enough to earn actual cheers. The splashing was chaotic, the yelling louder, and the laughter more frequent. It didn't look like training. It looked like summer. Cade stood waist-deep in the reservoir, watching a trio of cadets attempt synchronized paddling. They sank within seconds. He didn't even need to intervene. The others pulled them out, laughing and coughing. When he turned, he caught Zevran watching him. You're not just teaching us how to swim, Zevran said. You're teaching us how not to fear something we never thought could be survived. Cade didn't reply right away. He looked down at the water, still dark and shimmering beneath the afternoon light. Then he looked back at the cadets laughing on the shore, flinging towels at each other. It's not about the water, Cade said finally. It's about what we believe it can do to us. Change that belief, and everything else follows. Zevran nodded once. Then he waded back into the deep end, whispering his breath control mantra as he went. The first time a cadet asked to go underwater voluntarily, Cade almost told them no. It had been 12 days since the incident, since he'd been shoved into the reservoir, and nearly aspirated half his body weight in cold water. 12 days since the cadets who once mocked him now circled the edge of the same reservoir in tidy shifts, waiting for their turn to submerge, splash, float, and flail. Cade's ribs had healed well. The cough was gone. His breathing felt almost normal. A few stabs of soreness remained when he laughed too hard, but he was cleared for full activity again. Even the attending medic stopped giving him daily check-ins, settling for a "don't overdo it or I'll revoke your lungs" threat that felt more ceremonial than serious. The cadet who stood before him now was Rith, the sharp-eyed Krelian who once argued that water had no direction. His chest visibly rose and fell with slow, practiced breaths. "I want to go under, fully," Rith said. "I think I'm ready." Cade squinted at him. "You're not proving anything." "I'm not trying to." "Then why?" Rith's wide mouth twitched something almost like a smile. "Because I'm tired of fearing what's beneath." That stopped Cade. He didn't nod, didn't speak, just stepped aside. The other cadets nearby grew quiet. Rith waded in, deeper, deeper, until the water touched his chin. He hesitated just one heartbeat, then he bent his knees and let go. The ripples radiated outward. For 5 full seconds, the surface was undisturbed. Then Rith broke through again, snorting, flailing slightly, but upright, breathing, not drowning. The cheers were instant and uproarious. Cade felt them more than heard them, thudding through his chest. The look on Rith's face when he climbed out, shaking, soaked, eyes wide, wasn't triumphant. It was free. The following week, the Academy formally installed a perimeter of safety buoys and depth markers around the reservoir. Small platforms were added for instructors. Emergency rebreathers, unused but present, were stationed along the southern bank. The breathing grounds, as the cadets now called it, in whispers and training schedules alike, was no longer a rogue curiosity. It was a program. Cade had a schedule, 2 rotating shifts a day, 30 minutes each, 1 rest day per week, enforced by Menta, who still gave him long side eyes every time he cleared his throat too loudly. On his rest day, he sat by the edge with his legs dangling in the water, arms loosely crossed, watching the cadets work through their own warm-ups. They didn't need him to guide every moment anymore. Zevran had become something of an assistant instructor. Rith had taken on breath training. Even a few of the first-year cadets now practiced strokes independently, their limbs still clumsy but unmistakably confident. A few days ago, 2 cadets had actually managed a full lap around the shallow ring. No instructor had ever expected any species but humans to manage that. Cade wasn't sure what he felt. It wasn't pride, not in the conventional sense. It wasn't accomplishment either. It was something deeper, more settled. A quiet realization that no matter what happened next, whether they graduated, scattered across systems, or faced combat postings, these cadets had touched something their ancestors never had. And they'd done it together. Later that week, the Academy scheduled a cross-species demonstration for visiting brass. A dry lecture turned practical. Cadets would explain the psychological and physiological hurdles they had overcome to enter water, and then showcase what they'd learned. The human envoy, Commander Sienna Krojic, arrived early. She found Cade by the reservoir, standing barefoot in the water, watching Zevran guide a group through floating drills. "You're Cadet Holt," she said. Cade turned. "Yes, ma'am." She looked past him at the water. "You've made quite the impression. I just survived something I wasn't supposed to. The rest happened on its own." "No," she said, stepping closer. "You turned fear into curiosity. That doesn't happen on its own." Cade said nothing. She glanced again at the cadets, who had now begun to link hands and attempt synchronized kicks, failing hilariously but without any real distress. "Do you know what the council said when we proposed aquatic training at the interspecies level?" she asked. "I can guess. They called it primitive, biased toward Terran physiology, said it would never be accepted. That no alien would willingly enter deep water. That fluid immersion was too close to trauma for most cultures." Cade raised an eyebrow. "They were half right." "And still," Krojic said, voice low, "you got them in." "Not all of them. You didn't need all of them, you just needed the first." They stood there for a while in silence, the cadet noise fading into background rhythm splashes, grunts, occasional laughter. "You know," she said, "there's talk of transferring you to a permanent instruction position, possibly even off-world." Cade stiffened. "I didn't sign up to teach," he said. "I signed up to learn. You taught them what no one else could." "I didn't want to teach. I was just—" He stopped, exhaled. "I just didn't want to die in silence." Krojic didn't speak right away. When she did, her voice was quieter. "None of us do. But survival echoed becomes legacy. Think about it." Then she nodded once and walked away. The final demonstration happened 2 days later. An audience gathered around the reservoir. Instructors, medical staff, a few silent observers in diplomatic uniforms. Even a camera drone hovered at the edge, blinking red. Cade didn't speak during the demonstration. He watched from the sidelines as cadets explained their initial fear, how water had represented death, loss of control, alien vulnerability. Zevran spoke of the moment Cade emerged from the water, coughing but alive. "We thought he would scream. He swam instead." Rith demonstrated underwater breath control, holding a shallow dive for a full 10 seconds before resurfacing with a steady exhale. One of the youngest cadets, no older than 15 cycles, performed a basic breaststroke across the reservoir's shallow crescent. And at the very end, to the audience's utter disbelief, a trio of cadets dove simultaneously, resurfaced, then turned over and floated arms out, faces skyward. Complete trust. Afterward, there were no medals, no ceremony, just nods of acknowledgement, impressed murmurs, data notes logged and filed. The officials left. But the cadets didn't. They stayed. By twilight, the reservoir was still full. Cadets lined the banks. Some practiced quietly. Others sat cross-legged, watching the water ripple. Zevran found Cade again, tossing him a dry towel. "We were thinking," he said, "about writing a shared water protocol. Basic buoyancy, safety, interspecies translation notes. You know, just in case more of us want to learn." Cade took the towel. "That's a good idea. We'll call it the Holt method." Don't, Cade said instantly. Zevran shrugged. Too late. Cade looked out over the reservoir one more time. The surface reflected the night sky now, stars scattered across the water like they had fallen and couldn't climb back up. Beneath that, the murky depths once a place of terror now held something different. Not comfort, but understanding. The cadets had tried to break him in that reservoir, tried to drown a Deathworlder. Instead, he had taught them how to float, how to breathe, how to trust a world they were never meant to touch. And somehow, in teaching them, Cade had learned something himself. Fear is just knowledge, waiting for breath.